Welcome back to the Fuel Your Legacy show. And today we have another incredible guest. Super excited. I read his bio when it first came into my email and said, I really want to meet this person. And then I got on the call with him, and his energy is just very chill, the opposite of what I am most of the time. So I'm like, I really like this. I need more of this in my life. His name is Luis Baez. Had to say that a few times to make sure I got it right, but I'll let him say it and then we can determine who said it better. I'm just kidding. So with what Luis does in his business and career is he's basically a sales and revenue enablement leader. So he wants to help you improve your sales, your revenue, and he likes working. So I love the way he structured this as well, because I think it's so important to not just talk about what you do or why you do it, but talk about like who you actually want to serve, who you want to help. And we were talking before this saying, look, I get people to speak at events all the time, but just because somebody has great content doesn't mean the energy's right. And just because the energy is right doesn't mean the great content's there. So, but who he likes to work with is he has a passion for working with purpose-driven businesses. So they're not just a business out there to get money, but like have a mission and a purpose bigger than themselves behind it. So if you feel like that's you, pay special attention. If you know somebody that's like, send this episode to them. But I'm just super excited. Luis, get into your story. Start like young childhood. How did you end up getting to this position where you're at now? What were the circumstances? What was your family life like? What were some of those pivotal moments that led you to where you are today?
Well, I appreciate the question and thanks for having me today, Sam. I am someone who was born in Puerto Rico, raised in the South Bronx in the 80s and 90s. I grew up in poverty. I am the first in my family to graduate high school and get a diploma. I'm the first to go on to college, the first to own a business, the first to have a passport and travel the world. And that has been the context of everything that I do. And every opportunity that I step into, in every room that I step into, I'm typically one of the firsts in doing what I do. And I love it. And I'm here to, make sure that in every way, in every capacity that I can, I'm moving the needle forward. I ended up in working in sales after going through the sort of like first gen, trivial pursuit of I've got this college scholarship, I have this opportunity, a degree. I'm going to be a doctor. I'm going to be a lawyer. I'm going to be a business person. I'm going to screw this up. I've got to make money. I've got to help family. I got to make, squeeze all the juice out of this fruit. So I tried doing the doctor thing, hated it. Tried doing the lawyer thing, dropped out of law school, stumbled into business, and lo and behold, I have built a career beyond my wildest dreams. And that includes moving to the West Coast, being recruited to work in sales at LinkedIn, Google, Uber, and Tesla, starting my own consultancy and online business, and now working with other businesses and helping them to build their sales teams, build their sales playbooks, and implement all their sales systems.
Sounds like a big, lots of transformation at different times. How old were you when you left Puerto Rico and came to the Bronx?
Yeah, I was just a baby. And I like to say I was abducted because Puerto Rico is so beautiful. I wouldn't have left. So yeah, my family decided, based on circumstances around us and the available opportunity, we had family that was living in New York and gave my mom an opportunity to make their way over, and we ended up in the Bronx, and that's where we settled, and that's where I went to school.
So I don't know a lot I've only visited New York, but it seems that there's a high concentration, just like with any level of immigration. I feel like there's different ethnicities or country. I don't know, like Irish, they all settle in one spot. Like everybody's kind of settles in one spot. Why does Puerto Rico primarily concentrate in the New York, New Jersey area?
Yeah, that's a great question. The way that history would have it, it was just a motion of political sort of movement that was happening in New York. There were agricultural opportunities in like the Connecticut and New Jersey area. And so you have folks even till this day that live in Puerto Rico full time, and they'll come, to stateside to work on different farms for certain periods. And then they go back to the island, right? And so that's something that's existed for probably close to a century at this point. But we ended up concentrating in New York City in areas like the Lower East Side, East Harlem, the Bronx, and Brooklyn.
What other areas across the country would you say like are other hubs for the Puerto Rico, I don't know what to call them, group of people?
Yes, our community, our family, our bonds are across cities like Boston, New York. Chicago's a huge, we have huge representation there. Orlando, specifically after Hurricane Maria, there was a lot of migration from the island to Florida. And even here on the West Coast, right? I see pockets of Puerto Rican communities along the Bay Area and in Southern California as well.
What's a I don't know if this is the right word, but we'll call it a hallmark of like Puerto Rican culture that most people don't really know or understand. Like I know nothing, so like it's pretty easy for
Yeah.
me. But like,
I think the entire world is, is right now feverish about reggaeton. And reggaeton is a genre of music that came from the island, is blown up globally. It's a multi-billion-dollar genre. A lot of people vibe out also with Bad Bunny. At one point, he was the number one artist globally, topping all the charts, right? And I think that there's other representation, primarily when I think about media, right? Thinking about folks across different generations like J-Lo and Ricky Martin, but even in the political sphere, right? We have a Supreme Court Justice, Justice Sotomayor, who is also Puerto Rican. And so there are folks that are representing us, globally. And but I would say like the hallmark would be our music. Our music is known around the world.
okay, is the food something that's like special or people don't think about, or is
Absolutely.
it
Oh my
not like?
goodness.
I'm just asking. Like I've
Yeah.
never thought of like like you go to a pizza place, you go to American food, you go to Chinese food, you go to Mexican food, I've never gone to like a Puerto Rican food, like that's just not
Yeah.
something I went to. So I'm just curious, like,
Wow.
what are these places? What
Yeah.
type of food? How different is it from the other South American type
Yeah.
food? Like,
Yeah.
I'm just asking.
Our culture is Afro-Latino, meaning a lot of our music and our food is influenced by our African ancestry. And so if you were to sit down in a Puerto Rican restaurant and have a typical meal, you would have something like arroz con gandules, rice with pigeon peas, and it's made in a vegetable stock that we call sofrito, which is a blend of onion, garlic, cilantro, coriander, and other favorable sort of ingredients that bring out just like a really rich aroma and flavor in rice and in stews. And then we would probably serve up some roast pork shoulder. We call it pernil. And that's also marinated and roasted over a few hours, super, super crunchy skin. We probably serve up a side of an avocado salad, some cassava fries, yuca fries, as we call them. And we would think about even serving up a traditional beverage, something like a coquito if it's the holidays, which is a coconut nog, kind of like American eggnog, but no eggs. And then during the summer we'd serve up pitorro, which is our sort of version of moonshine, if you will.
Okay, awesome. So you grew up primarily, though, if you moved over in a baby, you primarily grew up in America and then have since probably been back and forth to Puerto Rico more than a few
Yeah.
times. And so
Yeah, I
what
grew up in New York and I went to school in New York, but I spent my summers in Puerto Rico. It was very
okay.
important for my family that I spoke Spanish, could prepare all the sort of traditional dishes, and had a strong relationship and bond with my family and with the island. And as a kid, of course, I was like devastated every time I had to get on a plane and leave my friends because I wanted to just hang out with them for the summer. But now as an adult, gosh, I wish they would send me to Puerto Rico every summer. I wish I could get away for 3 months every year.
Isn't that so interesting how as kids we have one perspective and we don't like, do you have children yourself right now, or you
No, I
no?
don't.
So what do you feel like could have been done better? And I say better as a relative, like in big old air quotes, because I don't know if there's an answer to this, but what do you think could have been done better to increase your awareness as a child of the value of what was happening, right? Because I felt that way a lot as a child. Things that I didn't understand, my parents were what I considered forcing me to do things or having me do things that I felt were above and beyond, like I shouldn't be expected to do this type of
Yeah.
things. But now looking back at, and I am a parent, I have three kids, and I think, man, I'm so grateful that my parents did that, and I hope I can have half of the resolve that they
Yeah.
had.
Yeah.
So what do you think could be done to better communicate that the value now that you're seeing the other side of it and the benefit? How could you communicate that value to? Because maybe it's not your kids, but maybe there's other children or other people
Yeah.
who listen to this who maybe are in that same struggle and want to know what's the value in this stuff happening.
I didn't I was a very rebellious child. And so, to answer your question very honestly, I don't know that anyone could have gotten through to me at that age, right? I was always, you tell me not to do something, why? I'm so curious. Why not? Don't open that box. Why? What's in it? Right? I want to see it, right? And so that was always sort of my response to everything around me. But I will say this, I really appreciated the way that my experiences allowed me to be able to switch across different spaces, cultures, environments, and be able to connect with so many creatures from so many walks of life, right? I grew up in New York City, and you mentioned like it's this hodgepodge of people from all over, from every lived experience. And I think that the experiences that I had in retrospect prepared me to connect with people that were very different from me because I had that empathy and that awareness of people live differently than we do here in New York. I had that experience of being in Puerto Rico, being in the countryside, up in the mountains, no electricity, no water at times, right? Very different perspective than being in New York, where everything is super crowded. And you're overstimulated. And I feel like that juxtaposition of experiences is where I was able to develop my empathy and my sympathy for people.
So let's talk about that because in the business world, I would say even in the political realm, just because business and politics are getting closer and closer together
Yeah.
um, all the time, we have this situation. We'll say in America, I think it's the world though, where there's this conversation at the very least of tolerance. Okay, so there's like empathy. Okay, I understand where you're coming from. I can be aware that you have a different lived experience than I do. But there's also a level of assimilation to a culture. If you want to have an actual culture that everybody kind of can trust their neighbors, then we have to align on certain beliefs. So how do you, how coming from New York, experiencing Puerto Rico, now moving across different areas in America, but also traveling the world and working with different companies in the business. I mean, Google, these are not small companies. They're a lot of them worldwide companies. So how do you personally determine whether you're just going to like, okay, I understand you're doing that. Where do you draw the line of like, hey, this is my standard of my values. And even though you're doing something different, I'm maybe not going to condemn you, but I'm going to disagree with you either publicly or internally. Like, how do you draw those lines growing up where you've kind of been conditioned to at least be aware of a lot of other people's choices and say, okay, I'm just not going to do that. I'm not going to do drugs. I'm not going to go be part of a gang. I'm not going to go do whatever it is. Like, okay, you can still be friends with these people and recognize their good hearts, even though their choices are different than you. But where do you draw the line for yourself and say, you know what, actually, I'm going to actively try and promote a different narrative and change the environment around me?
Yeah. Okay. So growing up in New York City, right, I grew up really in like the global buffet of any sort of experience, culture, my political outlook, religion, whatever, right? It was all available and accessible to me. And I was certainly aware of everyone's different lived experiences. I grew up with every creature of every walk of life. And as I started to travel the world, I started to recognize and realize there were all these common denominators in all of our lived experiences as human beings. We all want to feel safe. We want to feel loved on some level, whatever that definition of love looks like. We also need a sense of purpose. We don't thrive if we don't have direction, if we don't feel meaningful, valuable, impactful on some level. And that's something that I have found to be a common denominator, no matter what your lived experience is. And so when I come to the table, when I am connecting with people that are different than myself, and I'm negotiating my own identity and setting my own boundaries, I'm coming to the table always looking at those common denominators, right? Everyone gets the same level of empathy and compassion from me when I step into a conversation, and I adjust accordingly based on the interaction that we have.
Okay. So from more of a personal stance, like I would say I'm fairly good at reading people to a degree. Now, I also have decided, and this, I'll share a story about this. So when I was dating my wife, I'm pretty upfront and blunt person in general. Like I just tell you how it is, or at least how I see it, not necessarily how it is, but how Sam sees it. And you can take it or leave it. I don't really care how you feel about it. That's how I communicate generally. And that's like the general. And then I was going to go do door to door sales. And I did door to door sales out in Philadelphia, New Jersey, New York, right? So, like, very compared to Utah, where I grew up, Utah is a more passive aggressive communication style than New York. New York's very much just like, hey, get off my property. I don't want you here. Like, very, very different communication styles, more direct out east than generally than in the West. And so I was like, look, when I go over there, you're getting married to me here because we met in Utah and you have this certain idea of my communication style. When I go over there, I'm going to be more curt. I'm going to be more direct because that's the communication style of the environment. And I know that I don't want that to shock you. I don't want you to feel like I'm being rude to you, because I'm not. I'm just adjusting my communication style to the people that I'm trying to communicate with. And I was aware enough that I was going to change that, and we had that conversation. But there's still people who don't like how direct I am. Now, once I decided, I get to choose whether I care about that or not. Truth is, I don't care. Like, I care that you know that I care about you, but I'm not going to change myself so much just to kind of pussyfoot around everybody else in my life. I can't be that big of a chameleon. I have to take a stand on what things I'm willing to change about myself and what I'm not going to change. And I value direct, clear, curt, compassionate communication. I'm not here to poop on anybody, but I also want to be very direct. So that's a line that I've taken. What are some of those lines in your life that you said, you know what? I'm actually going to do this, even though I know I could change. I know I could appease somebody in my life. I'm going to choose not to, because I'm more committed to me being me than appease you so you feel a certain way about me.
That's a great question. I am an out gay man, and I have been for over 20 years. And in every space that I step into, I have to somehow negotiate, with people, my own safety, the resources I need, or whatever that might be. And at first, in my first few years, being overly aware of who I am, and overly aware because I'm constantly talking about it with people, there was just a lot of anxiety, around acceptance and fitting in and being approachable and adaptable. And then I ultimately realized that whether people like me or not, that determines my success to a certain degree, but in certain context, right? If I'm in a boardroom with customers, I can't take that stance of like, I don't care what you think of me. Actually, I have to care what you think of me.
Right.
You won't spend with me if you don't like me. And so I have to be performative in that space, and I have to filter whatever my thoughts and feelings and opinions might be. In my personal life, that's different, right? I think I'm aligned with you in that I am a very clear and direct person. I'm a New Yorker. I wear my heart on my sleeve. You get what you pay for, period, right? And so that's always my approach and my attitude. And I think that that's something that's helped me attract really amazing people that are thought leaders, entrepreneurs, investors, politicians, directors, community advocates. Like, I'm surrounded by really amazing people because I am so black and white in the way that I approach things in my own life.
Do you feel like there was a time in your life where being raised in New York, you probably were raised being direct, right? You were raised in that communication. And you don't realize that that's not contrary, but that's different than how other people are raised, until you really get outside of that bubble and people start being offended by you and sticking their nose up or whatever. And you're like, what did I even say that was offensive? I just told you what I think. Because you don't think it's offensive. So you go through that kind of identity crisis of, wow, I'm being received poorly to certain people because of my form of communication. Did you go through a phase where you maybe thought, well, maybe I shouldn't do this. Maybe I shouldn't be this direct. Maybe I should change how I communicate. What was that transition like, of like maybe going through the idea of not being that way and then ultimately deciding, you know what, I actually like who I am, and that's okay. Now I just tell people I'm from New York and they're like, oh, okay, he's from New York, because they understand that that's how they communicate there.
Yeah. So the the example that immediately came up in my mind was my transition from living on the East Coast to the West Coast. I worked in advertising sales in New York for years. And to your point, very clear, direct communication styles. I'm used to just like people being, cutthroat and direct. I stepped into Silicon Valley, alternate sort of corporate workspace, different culture than I'd been used to, but very optimistic about where I was headed. I wanted to be in a place that was more progressive. And the thing that I was up against was a lot of sort of passive aggressiveness. It'd be really nice if this were here. And so I'd look at the person, I say, hey, did you want me to put that there?
Yeah, exactly.
Is this what you're trying to communicate to me? Like, just say that to me. Like, I'm not going to be offended. I've got thick skin, right? And I tried to approach it from the standpoint of like, just talk to me, like, just open up to me, right? And that invitation was misconstrued as like, he's too direct and confrontational. And so I had to go through a period of like, all right, let me just like pull it back for just a second, right? Let me just do what needs to be done and build some trust around the people around me, and then start to insert my personality. And eventually people stop being caught up on like the way that I interact or my directness. They started to appreciate that. And it ultimately became my superpower as well, right? Working in an environment where people are like passive aggressive and indirect in the ways that they communicate, that really elongates processes and timelines in the business world, right? Whereas I come in and it's like blue, red, green, go, right? And it's just done. And so that became my advantage when I stepped into this industry.
Yeah, it's such a fascinating. I've experienced that in my life, so I was just curious, like, what's an experience that like you had in that realm? Because I can see that being a benefit, and also it's an interesting thing because you can read the culture. And the funny thing about passive aggressive communication styles is they recognize direct communication styles just as easily as we recognize passive aggressive communication styles. I don't feel like they're as aware of how to deal with directness as most direct people are about how to deal. Oh, okay, that's passive aggressive. How
Yeah.
can I do this tactfully? But like, yeah, I'm not doing that. I'm not gonna succumb to your way of being in that realm. So it's fascinating. What did you when you were going through the different things like doctor or lawyer, like all these different things you were trying out? You say, why did you try them out? Like, why even try some of those things? What was the bug in your ear or the person that you thought, if I do this, then like, why even try something like that?
Yeah, it was that combination of like, I'm the first in my family to ever get this opportunity. I want to bring honor to the family. I want to do something that for sure will make enough money so that I can provide for the family and get us out of poverty, right? Like I was our shot at, any sort of relief from the environment that we were living in and pursuing a safer environment and a better life and lifestyle overall. And so I took that responsibility very seriously. And all I knew, based on what I knew about the world growing up in poverty, was that doctors, lawyers, and business people make money. And so there was nothing else. I wasn't going to pursue being a writer or an actor or a painter or anything else. I needed to make money. And I pursued the doctor thing just because I happen to like science. I happen to be good at math, even though I hated it. I happen to be good at chemistry, even though I hated it. But that was the underlying thing. I hated it. I didn't love what I was doing. I was doing it, and there was so much friction. It was so misaligned that I remember that first week of college. I remember finishing one of my like labs. I want to say it was biology. And I'm coming out of the building and the sun is setting, and I just see everyone in the quad like tossing around frisbees and playing music and chilling. And I said, that's the college experience I want to be having. I don't want to be stuck in a building indoors and no windows all day. Like I don't want these 4 years of my life to go by. So I gave up the doctor thing. It was completely misaligned. The lawyer thing I stumbled upon because I finished college, graduated, originally was going to pursue a PhD, but put that on hold, moved back to New York City, and I landed a job as a paralegal at a nonprofit legal firm. And I loved the work that I was doing. I loved stepping in and helping people in that capacity. I was a bookworm my entire life. And so working with language and legalese and all these things like that was so fun and creative for me, right? It activated a lot of sides of my brain, right? Doing that kind of work. I worked as a paralegal for a year, and then I was appointed to be the assistant to a judge, and I worked for the judge for almost 3 years. And I loved working in law. But the study of law is a very different thing. When you step into law school, you're doing the case study thing. It's like I was used to like, here's the problem, here is like the statute and the procedure and the precedent, apply it, right? Whereas in law school, it's like, here's the origin of the law. Here are three cases that influence the way that this law was shaped. And you're just reading, case study after case study. And I was bored out of my mind. And I was also broke, going into heavy debt, trying to make that happen. And so I needed to make a decision. Again, it felt so misaligned. There was so much friction trying to make the shoe fit. And so I stopped and I dropped out and I found myself in this sort of feeling lost in the sauce, didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up, didn't know what to do with this, opportunity. I have this degree. I don't want to fail. I want to make everybody proud. I want to make sure we're all happy and comfortable and safe. And I was like venting to a friend of mine who was working at the marketing department at WebMD at the time. And she said, I don't know that you realize this, but you have this magnetism about you. Like, I know you're an introvert and you like to like, tap out and recharge or whatever. But when you're on court, you command. And I just wonder if like sales might be your thing. And I know that doesn't feel like right or whatever, but like, why don't you just try? There's an opening at my company. I'll put your resume in. Let's just go. So I said, sure, knowing nothing about sales. corporate culture, advertising, anything that I was getting myself into. I went through 8 rounds of interviews at WebMD and I got the job. And I got a significant bump in salary based on, compared to what I was making in the courthouse. And so that was my first corporate gig, my first sales gig. And that's when I realized, the doctor thing next, the lawyer thing next, the business thing was the shoe that fit. And it was the one that I didn't think would.
That's interesting. What about sales? Because again, you say you had no experience. What about sales did you ultimately find invigorating?
I admired those executives that could walk into a room and just command, right? Whether it was like they were an expert in what they were saying, the way that they spoke, their ability to like project their voice and articulate, and their capacity for crunching the numbers and understanding the way that business flows and operates and everything. I admired account executives that I was surrounded by. And it made me want to be that person. I wanted to be the executive that walked into the room and commanded. And so I just sort of stepped into trying to fake it till I made it, learning from everyone around me. And as I went along, I started to realize like there was that part of me, the doctor in me and the lawyer in me, right, that likes helping people. I love helping people solve a problem. I love being part of the solution, again, because all humans have a need for a sense of purpose. And my purpose is to help light bulbs go off over people's heads. And so doing that in business was that right balance of using both sides of my brain. And it also was an industry where I could show up as my whole self. Working in medicine, not as progressive at the time. Working in law, not as progressive at the time. Working in business as an out gay man was a safer space, especially in advertising.
Sure. So what did you learn? What was the least expected thing that you learned? So you went into this kind of, you get through 8 rounds of interviews. You really have no idea what to expect, but you're going to go learn sales. You're going to start learning. What was the biggest positive that you didn't expect you were going to get, but you got out of going through that career field into sales and advertising?
Yeah, gosh. The confidence that I've developed in myself, like that self-confidence and capacity, has led me down this path of now speaking and publishing and producing online courses that are being distributed on LinkedIn Learning, starting my own business. Like I am my biggest advocate, right? My capacity to speak up for the things that I want, need, and deserve was my biggest takeaway from going through the experiences that I've gone through. And, whether it was the discrimination that I went through, the pursuit of a promotion, or getting the promotion and like hustling to prove myself and keep my title, right? All of those sort of experiences combined led me to this moment of inflection.
I love that. From the process of learning sales and ultimately becoming good at it, as you were looking at these other individuals, what did you learn about them? Like, I'm going to try and figure out how to phrase this. Oftentimes when you meet people who you look up to and you think, oh, they're doing so great, they must be this type of person, they must be whatever. And then oftentimes people disqualify themselves because they think that they're different than the person who's really, really great, when in reality, there's actually way more similarities. What did you find were the most similar things of all the most successful people and the qualities that you had? Like, what were those things that were very similar?
That's a great question, because I feel like everyone at some point comes up against what you're describing as like imposter syndrome, right? Like a bit of like, I'm faking it. Do I deserve it? Or do I belong here? Are they going to figure out that like I'm not really capable, right? What I have learned from hobnobbing with Fortune 500 C-level executives, tech founders and venture capitalists, actors, producers, top-rated people across different industries. I have been so fortunate to walk through so many doors and connect with people and sit at the table and break bread with luminaries, right? And again, we all have that same human experience, that need for safety, that need to be loved, and that need to have a sense of purpose. And so I come to the table with these people that are super impressive to everyone else. But what I see is like this vulnerable child, right? When I come to the table and I just connect and I resonate. And ultimately, what I've learned is everyone at the top, whatever level of influence or however many millions or billions they have stacked, everyone feels a sense of imposter syndrome. I don't deserve this on some level. This came to me too easy. I'm going to get found out. right? Everyone's grappling with that. And so if I'm going to face imposter syndrome anyway, I want the money in the bag. I'll hire the therapist to help me through the rest.
I completely agree. I was talking to my sister the other day, and like, how do you raise good children? I don't know the answer, by the way. Like, I think my parents did a good job. And when I look at my parents, often they don't give themselves credit. Like, their self-esteem seems lower than what I would expect from somebody who raised 11 very assertive, commanding, confident children.
Yeah.
Like, wait, this is contrary a little bit. Then I was chatting with her, and I was like, okay, well, how do you raise these people, and do you be kind to them and kind of coddle them because you don't want to be too hard? Because then the whole movement says you can't expect too much from your people, or that we need therapy on college campuses now because like people are expected to do homework, and you're like, okay, like that's too far. The pendulum's too far of coddling the next generation of our society. On the other hand, you could go the other way and you expect way too much and you're too rude and too coarse. And so it's like, well, which therapy do you want to deal with? Right. And for me, I was like, I'd rather deal with the therapy of helping somebody learn how to relax than the therapy of teaching somebody how to actually do something productive with their life. Like, you have to choose one therapy. I'm with you. I'll do the therapy after the money's in the bank. Like, that's fine. If my children don't like me until they're 35 years old and go through what I'm going through, I'm okay with that, actually, because I think that when they do like me, they're going to love me. They're going to be so grateful that I taught them to be productive first and then dealt with their emotions. I believe that right now. I may think that differently in a few years. I don't know, but that's an interesting concept to think about. Another thing, I talked to my other brother, and he went to a recent personal development seminar experience called Limitless event in Utah. I don't know if you've heard of that one. It'd be fun to go to, but Keaton Hosk, I mean, there's just a bunch of people there, bunch of top level speakers. And he was sitting there in the audience thinking, man, that's so crazy. That's so amazing that you're up there doing this in front of 6,000 people. And so his initial response was maybe a little bit of like, I don't think I could ever do that. That's crazy. But then he remembered that like 3 weeks earlier, he was on stage in front of 6,000 people singing because he likes to sing. And so he did a performance and he sang 2 or 3 solos in front of 6,000 people. So it's like everybody has their own thing that they can share their talent in front of people and be confident in. And also people have things they would never dream of doing in front of somebody else. So understanding that your gift and talent may not be as a doctor, your gift and talent may not be as a lawyer, but your gift and talent may be in the same, just as much commanding of the environment, just as much clarity, just as much service, just as much care, but doing it in another element or another vertical where it's just as impactful, sometimes even more impactful and needed. We need strong people in every capacity, not just the ones that other people recognize.
Absolutely. I think one of the biggest pieces of advice or perspective that I got was from a friend of mine a few years ago as I made the pivot from being a sales individual contributor and being a sales leader and pivoting into revenue enablement and being a coach and instructor and stepping into training sales reps. She sat me down. She's Canadian and loves her figure skating. She sat me down. She's like, figure skaters at some point, they just stop qualifying for certain events, whether they're aged out or whether their bodies give out, right? Just from like having been on the road for so many years. And, what they do is instead they become Olympian trainers themselves. After they've gone out and gotten their medals and made their families proud, they go out and help other people do the same. And there's just something about that really resonated with me. I'm like, I could be a trainer. I could be an Olympian trainer. That this feels aligned. Thank you so much for this pearl of wisdom and perspective. And that was part of what helped me sort of understand and follow this path down this way. This was very much aligned.
I love that. Like the idea of having a mentor who can help you see greater perspective of what you could be, not just be a great in your space, but then also helping other people become great. So let's talk about that. What exactly, when you say sales enablement leader, what does that mean to you and to who you're trying to help?
Yeah. So imagine, if you will, someone that sits at the intersection of your sales, your marketing, and your operations. And they are in task with making sure that all of these systems and processes and teams all gel together, communicate with one another, all for the purpose of making sure that sales reps have what they need to facilitate the smoothest conversation with customers, whether that's having the tools that they need, the training and the certifications that they need to have confidence in selling, or the coaching, that they would need to adjust their behaviors and making sure that they are showing up as entrepreneurs, as executives, as stakeholders in the business. And so that's the role that in the world that I've stepped into, is that I, for many years as a sales rep, doing mid-market sales, enterprise sales, working with deals as small as 200,000, managing books well over 100 million in revenue a year, right? I know what it takes in terms of the support and the resources that I need. I understand the conversations I'm having with customers, the hesitation, the friction, right? I understand the sort of tools that facilitate everything, right? And so I put that hat on and that perspective on as I step into a company, or I step into a business, and I look to build that connective tissue across the functions to make sure that the revenue is there, right? Because you can't expect that salesperson or that customer to see success if things aren't in order in the back end of a business.
So what are like 2 or 3 big areas that if somebody's listening to this, just quick data, obviously, you can't share everything with them, nor would I say you should. I mean, I actually think that the reality is you probably should. You should make a podcast or free content and share everything you know, because in today's world, information is free. And so information doesn't help any. I don't want to say it doesn't help anybody. There's like such a small fraction of percentage who's going to take your information and actually do anything with it without you holding their hand, which for better or worse, it is what it is. People don't pay for information. They pay for implementation. And so understanding that, you could give it all away for free. But what are 2 or 3 things that you'd say, this is the first 2 or 3 things I would look at when I come into a business? I would want to know the answers to these 2 or 3 questions.
Great question. Number one, how do you define success as a business, as a company, as a team, as an individual? Number two, how do you celebrate and exemplify that success? Right? Are we holding space for people, celebrating people, inviting them to be subject matter experts, promoting them into leadership, right? Like, how do we celebrate and sustain that success? And then the third question would be around the DNA or the makeup of the people on the team, right? When I step into companies, there are things that people in that company have in common: an outlook, a work ethic, a specific thing that they believe. Right? When I stepped into Google, it was a very analytically driven place, right? I was surrounded by people who made decisions by looking at numbers. And that was the common thread across the DNA of anyone that worked there. And when I worked at LinkedIn, it was all about being conduits and people and connectors of people. That was the common thread of people that worked in that company, right? They wanted to make sure that people were shaking hands across the table. And so that's something that I always ask stepping into a business as well. It's like, what's the DNA and what's the culture like here? Like, what is it that keeps people coming back?
Coming back as employees or as customers?
As employees.
As employees. So is your primary focus, I don't know if this is even the right word, primary focus, but is your primary focus to help the businesses and their employee sector? So like, that's really who you're adding the most value to. Obviously that's going to trickle down into the customers, but that's the level that you're working with, is the employer and the team? Or are you working with specifically, how does the team interact with the customer base and acquire more business?
Across all of these things, right? So at the end of the day, when we're looking at, like, if I were to sit down and do a performance review with someone at a company, what they would be looking at to determine whether I was successful at my job would be the performance of sales reps. Do they close? Do they close fast? Do they close a lot? Are they all hitting goal? Are they all exceeding goal? If I'm not meeting those benchmarks, anything else I do doesn't matter. In addition to those benchmarks, I'm also being held to revenue performance metrics. We're launching a new product. We need $10 million in annual recurring revenue behind this product within the first 6 months of launch. And so I'm scrambling to make sure everyone is trained, proficient. They have all the tools to demo the product. We have all the tools to onboard new customers, right? So I am working in the back end and sort of ironing out those kinks so that at the end of the day, the numbers are there and the reps are hitting numbers.
Awesome. No, that actually answers my question very beautifully. So thank you. So we're out of time today, but if somebody wanted to interact with you, go and get maybe some of your free content, go through that, or actually just engage directly with you, where would be the best place to get a hold of you?
Yeah, you can certainly hang out with me on LinkedIn. That's where I spend my time. But if you are interested in learning everything that I just shared today, I lay all my strategies bare. To your point, Sam, free currency, free content, it's all laid out there. I developed a program called Flex and Flourish. It's my sales and leadership program, and you can grab it at learnfromluis.com.
Perfect. Learnfromluis.com. And that would, I think everybody should go at least go process through that information. The reality, again, the chance of you implementing it. If you are one of the ones who implements without somebody holding your hand, reach out to me. I'll get you on the podcast. I want to find out where you developed that skill. You're truly a unicorn if that's the case. I just don't know that many people, even at the highest level. It's funny, actually, when you increase your wealth, people get less and less wanting to be the implementer. And they're just like, okay, sure, get it done. And they want to pay somebody else to do it. There's very few people who are going to act on the information. They want to pay somebody else to act on the information. So if that's you, I want to talk to you. You are the implementer, but if you're not, then go and learn from Luis and figure out how you can implement this stuff into your business. And hopefully we'll get him speaking in person and you can go visit him in person. So again, that's learnfromluis.com. And thank you so much for your time. Thanks for going into all of your kind of cultural history. I was just really curious. I didn't know that much about it. So thanks for being open about that.
I appreciate the space to show up as my whole self.
Awesome. I love it. And we'll catch you guys next time on the Fuel Your Legacy Show.